It's not enough to quit your job. It's not enough to change your lifestyle. It's not enough to tell people about at a dinner party without getting a politely underwhelmed response. But it changes something else entirely, something that I couldn't explain to anyone until I lived through it myself, and something that once it happens to you, you cannot unfeel for the rest of your life. At 28, I was working 50 hours a week and thinking about money every single night. Not in a productive way. In that low-grade, anxious way where you're not doing anything useful with the worry, you're just carrying it around. Checking your account before you fall asleep, running mental calculations about whether you could handle an unexpected expense. Feeling the subtle but constant pressure of knowing that everything depended on one thing, the paycheck hitting on Friday. At 35, I was still working, still had meetings, still had deadlines, still had a boss. Nothing dramatic had changed about my external life, but there was $1,000 coming into my account every month that had nothing to do with any of it. Money that didn't care whether I showed up to work. Money that didn't care whether I was sick or tired or having the worst week of my year. Money that was just there, quietly, every single month, doing its job while I was doing mine. The difference between those two versions of me wasn't the number. It was what the number did to everything else. I'm Elizabeth, a financial advisor. And today I want to tell you about 3 things that happen when passive income hits $1,000 for the first time. 3 things that nobody warned me about. 3 things that I now consider the most important psychological milestones in the entire journey toward financial independence. Not because $1,000 a month makes you free, but because of what it reveals about where you're going and who you're becoming. The first thing that happens is this: you get proof. And proof does something to you that information never can. Think about how most people start this journey. You read about compound interest, you watch videos, you run the numbers on a spreadsheet, and you see the projections. 30 years from now, if you invest consistently, you'll have this amount. The math checks out. You believe it enough to start. But believing something and knowing something are 2 completely different psychological states. And the distance between them is larger than most people realize until they've crossed it. When you're in the believing phase, there's always a quiet voice underneath everything. Not loud enough to stop you, but present. Asking, what if this doesn't actually work for me? What if the projections are real in theory, but somehow don't apply to my specific situation? What if I'm doing something wrong and I won't find out until it's too late? That voice isn't irrational. It's actually quite sensible. Because you haven't seen the evidence yet. You're operating on faith in a system that hasn't delivered anything tangible to you personally. And then the month arrives when your passive income hits $1,000. I remember the exact moment I noticed it. I wasn't doing anything significant. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, half awake, scrolling through my accounts. And there it was, $1,023, generated by my portfolio over the previous 30 days. While I was sleeping, working, sitting in traffic, watching television, going about my completely ordinary life. I didn't feel euphoric. I didn't feel like celebrating. What I felt was something quieter and stranger than that. I felt certain. Not excited. Certain. The difference matters enormously. Excitement is what you feel when something good might happen. Certainty is what you feel when you know something is true. And in that moment, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, I stopped believing that the system worked and started knowing it. That shift from belief to knowledge changes everything about how you interact with the system going forward. Before that moment, every market dip was an invitation for doubt. Every month where returns were lower than expected carried a small but real psychological weight. Every time you had to make a contribution instead of spending that money on something immediate and enjoyable, there was a subtle negotiation happening internally about whether it was worth it. After that moment, none of those things carry the same weight anymore. Because you've seen it work. With your money in your account, in real life. The doubt doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its power over your behavior. Because now when it shows up, you have something to point to. Not a projection, not someone else's story, your own evidence. I've watched this happen with dozens of clients over the years. And what I've noticed is that the clients who reach $1,000 in passive income almost never stop. not because they suddenly have more money or more discipline or more motivation, but because the uncertainty that quietly undermines so many people's financial journeys simply doesn't have the same grip on them anymore. They've seen the proof, and proof is more powerful than any amount of information or inspiration. This is why I tell every client I work with, the goal of your first 5 to 7 years of investing isn't a number, it's a feeling. Specifically, it's the feeling of knowing, not believing, knowing that the system works. And $1,000 a month in passive income is roughly where most people find that feeling for the first time. Everything before that is faith. Everything after that is momentum. The second thing that happens is that you feel compound interest for the first time. Not understand it. Feel it. These are not the same thing, and the difference between them is what separates people who stay in the system from people who eventually drift away from it. Most people understand compound interest intellectually from the moment they first encounter it. The math is straightforward. Money grows, growth generates more growth. Over long periods, the results are remarkable. You've seen the charts. You know how it works. But understanding something in your head and experiencing it in your life are two completely different things. Let's say you've been investing for 7 years. You've been contributing $1,500 a month consistently. Your portfolio has grown to around $175,000. And your passive income, dividends, distributions, the returns your portfolio generates, has just crossed $1,000 a month. Now look at what's actually happening. You're contributing $1,500 a month from your income. But your portfolio is now generating $1,000 a month on its own, which means effectively, $2,500 a month is being added to your wealth. You haven't changed your behavior at all. You haven't found ways to earn more or save more aggressively. But the rate at which your wealth is growing has increased by 67% simply because the portfolio has gotten large enough to contribute meaningfully to its own growth. When I explain this to clients before they've experienced it, they nod. They understand it. They file it away as a reason to keep going. When I explain it to clients who have just crossed $1,000 in passive income, and I show them the numbers in their own account, something different happens. Their eyes change. There's a moment of genuine recalibration happening in real time. Because now it's not abstract. It's not a projection. It's their money, their account. Their $1,000 a month appearing without any additional effort from them. And the natural next question, the question that always follows, is how long until it's $2,000? This is the question that reveals everything, because the answer is almost always shorter than they expect. Getting from $0 to $1,000 in monthly passive income typically takes somewhere between 7 and 10 years, depending on savings rate and returns. It's a long road. Getting from $1,000 to $2,000 in monthly passive income takes significantly less time, not because anything changes about your behavior, but because the portfolio that generates $1,000 a month is now large enough that its own growth is doing a substantial portion of the heavy lifting. You're still contributing $1,500 a month, but the portfolio is contributing $1,000 a month. You're effectively saving $2,500 a month without working any harder or spending any less. And when you reach $2,000 a month in passive income, the portfolio will be contributing $2,000 a month to its own growth. Add your $1,500 contribution, and now $3,500 a month is going toward building your wealth. The acceleration continues. This is what compound interest actually feels like when you're living inside it, rather than reading about it from the outside. It feels like the system is starting to carry more and more of its own weight, like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and at some point the boulder develops its own momentum and starts helping you push. Nobody can fully understand that feeling until they've felt it. And $1,000 a month in passive income is roughly where most people feel it for the first time. I had a client, I'll call her Michelle, who came to me at 29, skeptical, pragmatic, not particularly interested in personal finance as a topic. She was investing because she understood she should be, not because she was passionate about it. She asked good questions, but she was fundamentally in the believing phase. I worked with her for 6 years. Consistent contributions, index funds, no dramatic moves, boring system, faithfully executed. When her passive income crossed $1,000 for the first time, she sent me a message that I still think about. She said, "I finally understand why people who do this can't stop talking about it. It's not about the money, it's about the feeling of watching something you built start to build itself." That's the most accurate description of this moment I've ever heard from anyone. Watching something you built start to build itself. That feeling does not exist before $1,000. It exists in full force after it. And once you've felt it, the system stops being something you have to motivate yourself to maintain. It becomes something you're genuinely curious to watch develop. The third thing that happens is the subtlest, and in some ways, the most important. Your relationship with your work changes. Not dramatically. You don't quit. You don't stop caring. You don't suddenly become disengaged or distracted. But something shifts in a way that's difficult to articulate until you've experienced it. Before passive income, your job is everything. Not necessarily because you love it or because it defines you, but because it is the only source, the single point of failure. The one thing standing between your current life and financial difficulty. When your boss calls on a Tuesday evening with a request that feels unreasonable, the calculation happening in your head, usually unconsciously, involves your mortgage, your bills, your savings rate, your entire financial life. The stakes of the interaction are enormous, even when the interaction itself is small. When a project goes badly, or a relationship at work gets difficult, or you find yourself in a meeting that makes you question why you do what you do, there's no exit. Not a real one. Because the income has to come from somewhere, and right now it only comes from one place. That's not a comfortable way to live. And most people don't realize how uncomfortable it is until they have something to compare it to. $1,000 a month in passive income doesn't change the practical reality very much. It's not enough to live on. It's not enough to make the job optional. If you make $70,000 a year, $12,000 a year in passive income is meaningful but not transformative in terms of your actual financial situation. But psychologically, the dynamic shifts in a way that is completely disproportionate to the dollar amount, because you are no longer operating from a single source. The job is still the primary source by a lot, but it is no longer the only source. And that distinction, as small as it sounds, changes the texture of every interaction you have with your work. I noticed it first in a meeting about 3 months after my passive income crossed $1,000. My manager was pushing back on something I'd recommended in a way that felt more political than analytical. And I felt myself responding differently than I normally would have. Not aggressively, not recklessly, but from a slightly different place internally. There was less fear underneath the conversation. Not no fear, less fear. And less fear meant more clarity, more willingness to hold my position when I believed I was right, more ability to focus on the actual substance of the disagreement rather than the political implications of being seen to disagree. Nothing visible changed in how I showed up that day, but something internal had shifted. And it kept shifting, slowly, as the passive income grew. At $1,000 a month, you feel the beginning of it. A subtle loosening of something that you didn't fully realize was tight. At $2,000, it's more pronounced. At $3,000, clearer still. It's not about the money, it's about what the money represents, which is the beginning of optionality. The early stages of a world in which your financial life does not depend entirely on any single decision made by any single other person about whether to keep employing you. I've talked to hundreds of people about this over the years, and the ones who have crossed the $1,000 threshold almost universally describe some version of this shift. They use different words, they locate it in different moments, but the underlying experience is the same. They started showing up to work differently. Not because they cared less. Often because they cared more. Because when you're not operating from fear, you have more of yourself available to actually do good work. But differently. From a place with a little more ground underneath it. One of my clients, a software engineer I'll call David, described it to me like this. He said before passive income, going to work felt like something he had to do. After passive income started growing, going to work started feeling like something he was choosing to do. The external circumstances were identical, but the internal experience was completely different. And he said the strange thing was that he became better at his job. Not because he worked harder, but because when you're choosing something rather than being compelled by it, you bring a different quality of attention to it. $1,000 a month doesn't buy you freedom, but it gives you the first real glimpse of what freedom feels like. And once you've seen it, once you've felt that slight loosening, that subtle shift from compulsion to choice, you cannot unfeel it. And you cannot stop wanting more of it. Let me tell you where Michelle is now. She's 41. Her passive income is $3,800 a month. She still works. She likes her work, she's good at it, and she has no particular desire to stop. But she negotiated a 4-day week last year. Her employer said yes immediately. She thinks they said yes because she asked from a place of calm rather than desperation. She didn't need them to say yes. She just wanted them to. They could tell the difference. She told me recently that the version of her at 29, skeptical, pragmatic, investing because she knew she should, would not recognize the version of her at 41. Not because her life looks dramatically different from the outside, but because the way she experiences her life is fundamentally different. She knows the system works. She's felt compound interest accelerate in real time. And she goes to work every day because she chooses to. 3 things. All of them started the month passive income hit $1,000. Not because $1,000 is a magic number, but because it's the threshold at which all 3 of these shifts become real in a way that information alone can never make them real. If you're not there yet, if you're still in the phase of believing rather than knowing, of understanding compound interest rather than feeling it, of going to work because you have to rather than because you're choosing to, I want you to hear this clearly. The threshold is reachable for average people with average incomes who are willing to be consistent for long enough. The math is not complicated. The system is not sophisticated. The path is boring and straightforward and available to almost anyone who commits to walking it. It takes time. More time than feels comfortable when you're in the early years, and the progress feels invisible. But the proof is coming. The acceleration is coming. The shift is coming. And when it arrives, you'll understand why I'm telling you about it today. Because you won't be able to stop thinking about what comes next. I'm Elizabeth. If this gave you something you needed to hear today, share it with someone who's still in the early years of this journey. They need to know what's waiting for them on the other side. And I'll see you in the next one.